So let's work on the output here of our log of the calculation we did, so to say. Here I in the end want to output the last calculation we did. And for that I want to output a string here, and I'll create it with backticks so that I can inject values dynamically with this $ curly brace syntax. Because what I want to output is current result plus and then the new result. Now the problem we have with that, of course, is that after this line our current result already changed. So I rather create this description here, maybe just name it description or calc description or whatever you like, and grab the template literal as it's called and move it up here. And then here I refer to current result before we change it because I run this line before this line. And I want to add my number here. So I can copy this code and add this here as well. And actually we of course don't need to parse this as an integer because I will need it as a text anyways. We're building a text here after all. So I can also just use it like this. Side note, when using this embedding syntax here in a template literal, any values you pass in, even if they're numbers, will be converted to a string anyways. So this implicitly calls toString anyways, you could say. So this is automatically treated as a string here. And now I build my description here and output this as well and reformat the code to use these two blanks here as indentation. And now we're building the description before we run the calculation. And now if I save this and I reload and I enter 5 here, we see the description of the last calculation we performed whenever we, well, run a calculation. We don't see the full log because that would be way more complex to build, a bit beyond what we can do right now, but we see the exact calculation that was just executed that led to this new result. Now, with that, there's however more we can change about this function, because what we're doing here is we have a bit of code repetition. Now, in general, as a programmer, you want to avoid code repetition as good as you can, as much as you can. Because if you repeat code, you write too much and that takes time and you want to save time. And in addition, if you ever need to change something about that piece of code, about that logic you wrote there, chances are that you need to change it in a couple of different places. So therefore, you want to avoid repeating yourselves so that whenever you need to change that piece of code you wrote, you only need to change it in one place instead of 10 places or something like that. So here, for example, extracting that user input value, let's say we renamed this user input constant here to USR input. Well, then I have to change it in two places. USR input, USR input. Of course, that's not too bad, but imagine that this would be a longer script. Would be very annoying. So it's better to then create a new constant, since I never plan on reassigning a value, which I could name user number, or better maybe entered number. And that could be this code snippet here. So where I get the user input and parse it as an integer. And now we can use entered number here because that string interpolation or embedding syntax here doesn't care whether that's a string or a number. It will convert it to a string anyways. And we can use it here. And now the advantage of this is that whenever something changes here, like the name of this constant, we only need to change it here and not in these two places. So even though I added a new line of code now, we actually did something good because we're now more flexible and we don't repeat ourselves. Well, of course, we repeat that name of the constant, but that's something we can't change. However, we make sure we don't repeat the entire logic here, even though, of course, that's not too much logic here, but you could have a more complex calculation and you would therefore even save more repetition. You could also take it one step further and add a brand new function. Get user input, for example. Again, I named this function like this because I want to describe what the function does. And this is a function which should actually give me the user input as a number. So we could also name it get user input number or get user number input if you want to be very clear. But in the end, you want to give a clear idea of what this function does. Well, and in there, I wanna return this logic here, where I get that user input and parse it as an integer. So that here, I can just call get user number input as a function. So here I now call that manually instead of adding it to an event listener, because whenever this function runs, I want to run this function as well, which I now use to outsource this logic. That's especially great, of course, if you have more code here, multiple lines of logic, for example, that you want to share. You can then all put it into a function and call that function in any place in your code where you want to execute it. Right now, that's only one place, but that will soon change because we got more than one button here. So let's work on the other buttons now.